Welcome to China Days, The Journey, conversations with publisher Kris Millegan. I am Bruce DeTorres. With us is Daniel Estulin, award-winning investigative journalist, radio host, and author of The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, the international bestseller about the annual meeting of leaders from Western Europe, Canada, and the United States. His other China Day books are Shadow Masters, How Governments and Their Intelligence Agencies Are Working with Drug Dealers and Terrorists for Mutual Benefit and Profit, In the Shadows of a Presidency, a behind-the-scenes chronicle of how Donald Trump became president. Tavistock Institute, Social Engineering the Masses. Trans-Evolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction. Deconstructing WikiLeaks, The Octopus Deception, a novel, and Global Projects at War, Tectonic Processes of Global Transformation. Daniel and Kris, it's great to be with you both.
Thank you, Daniel, for coming on.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
To say the least, we live in a wild world. One thing I wanted to talk about is your latest book, Global Projects at War. Can you explain that book a little bit?
Well, my second last book was the In the Shadows of the Presidency, which explained the arrival of Donald Trump on the scene. And so what I do is I create models that define the future. And I thought to myself that it was pretty much a good time to think of a way to explain to people what it is that's, up ahead. My point of departure was that the whole idea of nation states, Westphalia, et cetera, it's gone. That world is gone forever. And so we're coming into a new world, into a world of not so much nation states, but regional blocks. And we're seeing that right now, when in fact BRICS and Brexit were two of the early attempts to regionalize world economy, which basically needs between 300 and 500 million people to survive as a regional bloc. The way, as a kind of intellectual driver in this sense, was the idea that I came up with of a global project. Now, the global project is defined by having three ideas. First, the conceptual vision of the world. Now, a global project is not a country. It could be a region, it could be secret societies, it could be some conceptual center. The second is to have independent financial system, and third is to have an independent intelligence apparatus. So in this sense, for example, a Vatican is a global project. And although it doesn't have nuclear weapons, it doesn't need to. It has the conceptual understanding of the world over the past 2,000 years. It's as the premier intelligence apparatus in the world, Union Sanctum. Needless to say, 2,000 years of making money, they have a lot of money. In this sense, for example, France or Germany or Japan, they don't have the necessary requirements or prerequisites to be a global project. When you're looking at these global projects, you're looking at ideas of different groups working together. There are actually 6 global projects. Okay, one of them is Great Europe, and the conceptual leader of this project is the Vatican, or in other words, Black International Project. If you look at some of the other projects, we can talk about New Babylon, which is, again, New York Financial Center. These are the financial banker liberalists. And while the Bretton Woods model worked, the New Babylon, as I call it, the liberal banking financiers, they were able to amass huge assets. And their main problem was, and is now, due to the bankruptcy of their model, the mechanism of increasing these assets has been broken. So they need a new model, which they don't have. Another project is the New Jerusalem, which is a project based out of London, England. And this project has, let's say, a mystical element, a Kabbalist element, okay? But they lack the resources. In this case, they don't have the emission center as the New Babylon does in New York. And so they previously had an empire resource. In other words, control of the drug trade through the British Empire, but the British Empire is dead. And today there are no resources, but the idea what needs to be done remains. And so, for example, if you look at the New Jerusalem project, what's their goal? Well, the goal is to find a new resource in order to survive as a project. And now, where could they find this new resource after the bankruptcy of the old economic model? Well, again, Great Europe or the Vatican. Okay, so with Brexit, European market is close to them. Now, another project is China, the Great Datun project. China is a nation, but it's also a project. And if we're talking about, for example, the Great European Project, behind the Great European Project on the conceptual ideological level, again, is the Vatican. And behind the Vatican, you have the old mystical orders. And behind the Chinese project, you have the dragons, the old nationalist clans. And so China as a global project, has its own mystical element via what they call the mandate of the heaven that merges with the Silk Road, which is one of the reasons why it's so important for them to have their Silk Road project. In other words, the global Chinese territorial expansion, which is what it is. China, just like the Kabbalists, they each have their own 3,000-year-old plan. You have Plan Solomon on the one hand, and the Chinese Taoists on the other. Okay, and if you look at the European project, and I've said it again many, many times, and I explain it in detail in the book, that the Vatican Black International is literally the revenge of the Roman Empire of the Germanic nations. In other words, it's blood and soil. These are the old landed aristocracy. Okay, people think when they think of projects, they think of nations. Okay, so when we think of great Europe, it's the Vatican, but China has another plan in mind. It's a very different concept. Because what does China want? China wants to build cooperation with Europe, bypassing the Vatican, especially if the new financial center moves from the post-Brexit London to Berlin, the epicenter of the Black International itself. And so China and Europe, that's, we can talk about a new Babylon, Wall Street liberalism. They're trying to stop these movements at all costs. Now, a question, how would, for example, the Chinese and the European alliances work together? Because a lot of these projects, and again, there are 6 projects. There's China, the Great Datun projects, the European Great European project. There's New Jerusalem, that's London project. You have Great Eurasia, that's Moscow as a capital. But we're not talking about Putin. We're talking about global projects. And then, of course, you have the liberal project out of New York, the liberal banking financiers, and finally you have the Red Sufi Caliphate out of Turkey. And again, we're not talking about Erdogan. Okay, these are global projects on a conceptual level. Okay, and the people who sit at the table as the representatives of this project, just think of it as, New Yalta. You have, the president of Russia sitting at the table, but he's not the project. He's just the face, and behind him, okay, you have the old orders. The same could be said for New Jerusalem project. You have the Kabbalists behind. The same could be said for the New Babylon project out of New York. That's Skull and Bones and Illuminati. So again, the people sitting at the table, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's Putin, whether it's Xi Jinping, it makes really no difference at all. They're not the heads of the project. They're just the faces of the project, which is much more obviously hidden behind the scenes.
Okay, so how does the BRICS, their alliances with these other countries, how does that work into that?
Well, again, because when you're looking at BRICS, you're looking at the ways of regionalizing the global economy. What we're seeing right now, the monolithic world is gone, the unipolar world, where the United States basically tells every other nation in the world how to survive. And again, I talk about it in the book, whereas before, if we go back to the 19th century, you had 4 projects. You had 4 ideas, economic models, I should say, no projects. Okay, you had the British model, you had the Prussian model after the war with France in the 1870s, they had the American model at the end of the 19th century, and they had the Japanese, after the First War with Russia in 1904, 1905, which was based on the major revolution from 1868. And then at the end of World War II, these 4 economic models became 2. You had capitalist West, in other words, the United States and satellites based on the dollar system and everything else that comes with it, private property, et cetera, et cetera. And you had the Soviets and satellites, the Warsaw Pact, ruble, and based on the idea not on private property, but an idea of common good. And these 2 models that coexisted between end of World War II, 1945 and 1989 or 1991, whether you take the collapse of the communist bloc as the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, or we're talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union in Christmas 1991. In any case, and these 2 models that coexisted between the end of World War II and 1991. And in some aspects, needless to say, the West was much better. It was more, comfortable. You could buy all kinds of goods which you couldn't buy in the Soviet Union. You could go to the store and pick out of the 100 types of cheese that pick one that you wanted, as opposed to only have one type of cheese as we had in Russia or in the Soviet Union. In other aspects, the Soviet system was much better because you didn't pay any taxes beginning in May 1960. You had free housing, free everything, free healthcare, free education. How much does it cost to go to the best university in America today? Well, these same quality, if not better, universities were free. You had everything was free. And the third leg of this dialectic was the population base itself. And in this sense, the Soviet Union had 295 million, the United States 220. But if you added, other nations and other, of each of these groups, you had more or less, equality. And so these two models coexisted between the end of World War II and 1991. And then in 1991, as a result of internal strife, because the Soviet Union, as a nation with, the greatest, army in the history of the world and more nuclear weapons than anybody else on the planet, if you combine them all together, could only be destroyed from within. And it was destroyed from within because the Soviet bureaucracy, when they died, no matter how powerful they were, they couldn't leave anything to their heirs because it was everything was everyone's, okay, because of the idea of common good. And so in order to become billionaires and to steal, you had to destroy the country from within, which is exactly what was done to the Soviet Union. And so the two systems merged in 1991 into one global liberal banking financier system. And the idea itself was based on, on infinite expansion. And the West needed to expand infinitely because the model itself, the Bretton Woods economic model, could only work if you could expand at the expense of someone else. And they, again, this expansion existed between 1991 and 2007 because the capitalist model is a very dynamic model. So they expanded into Soviet space. And in 17 years, they took over the 40% of the global space, which before that was controlled by communist countries, the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, that bloc. But then in 2008, we had what we had, the collapse of the global financial model, which was the beginning of the end. So if you're looking at that beginning of that end, what we're seeing right now is you have a metaphorical patient who basically went to the hospital in 2008 because he had, stomach ache. And now he's on his deathbed. It's just a matter of time how long his heart lasts, and he's dead. So the model is gone. And the unipolar world is gone too, because it could only exist at the expense of someone else. But because they've reached a limit of growth on the planet Earth within this economic model, you can't expand anywhere else. And what we're seeing right now is that model collapsing onto itself. And what we're seeing right now are attempts to redesign the world based on other ideas, except the problem with that, Kris, unfortunately, the people who are doing that, they don't have the language to explain that what's coming, fast around the corner. In a sense that I'm not talking about Russian or English or French or Chinese or German, I'm talking the language of economics. They don't know, they don't have can't explain it.
I think the economics to a certain extent is a manufactured item, okay, that is divorced from some reality. They're making the rules, and so they want to live by those rules when, the natural order of things, that's not how it should be.
This is explained, and those who are watching this, I very strongly suggest you read the book because a lot of things that no one has ever talked about. On the one hand, you have the physical economy. On the other hand, what you have is, people playing with numbers on a computer screen. We've gone from the fourth techno paradigm, which is not fourth industrial revolution. We're not there yet. We've gone from the fourth technological paradigm, which is, productive industrial economy. In other words, productive physical economy. Okay, to post-industrial, which is the fifth techno paradigm. Basically what that means, people playing with numbers on the computers and saying, I'm a billionaire. No, you're not. You got lots of zeros on the computer screen, but I can erase those. We know how that works. And now we're coming into the sixth technological paradigm, which is the trans-industrial economy. Now, trans doesn't mean transsexuals. We're talking about virtual reality. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about all the kinds of things we've actually seen. And again, there's a reason for it. During COVID pandemic, okay, smart contracts, distance learning, et cetera, et cetera. It's all part of this new economy. And for that to work, with the need, it's called Greek paradox. You need to destroy everything else that was done before, because otherwise you can't build something new. And that's where we're at right now. So you have two different kinds of economies. You have the productive economy, when you physically build things. In the United States before, look at Detroit, okay? It was a productive economy where they built things, physical things, cars you can actually drive. And now they have nothing in Detroit. They have nothing in most parts of the world because they're speculating. And
but we're producing computers and chips and other things, and there's things that are moving. Now I have a bone to pick with you about the book, and that you say that America is going to stop being a democracy in like 20 years.
Well, I mean, it's. Do you think it's a democracy now? I mean, I don't. I see it as a total dictatorship. I mean, first of all, America was never a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. We know that.
Right.
Okay. And I don't think I ever talked about democracy itself, but the idea, what I do explain, I can't remember exactly which part of the book I'm actually talking about that. But the idea is, what I'm saying in the book is that, I use the metaphor of a train that, in 1991 arrived at a station, and that station said the Soviet Union. Okay. And the same train today is coming into another station that says the United States. And the reason I say this, and again, all these things that Kris and I are talking about, I explain in detail in this book, which is a beautiful poster, Global Projects at War 2045, is the fact that the United States is a country, like, you and I have a life cycle. We could live 100 years, 97, whatever, like Henry Kissinger, who lives forever. Okay, I don't think it's 100, I think it's like 100,000 years old. But anyway, that's another story for another day. But so the point is that, but countries also have a life cycle. And this life cycle could be whatever it is. Like Russia has a short 100-year cycle and a long 600-year cycle. Europe has a 244-year cycle, out of which 177 years is peace and the rest is war. And the United States as a country has an 80-year cycle, give or take 2 or 3 years. So you kind of go back, way back to the beginning. Okay, let's not talk about the Pilgrims, a little bit later, till the end of the 16th century. No, 17th century, sorry, late 1600s. And you start adding like linear, okay, 80 years to 80 years and 80 years. So the first 80-year period takes you to 1776, which is the revolution. The next 80-year period takes you to 1860, which is the Civil War. The next 80-year period takes you to 1940, which is the Second World War. And the last 80-year period, not this one, takes you to 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. And if you kind of look at the history of the United States, it's always wiggled out of, its personal problems through some kind of a, armed conflict, whether it's a revolution, whether it's a civil war, whether it's Second World War. And now what we're looking right now, it's like a fork in the road. You have global thermonuclear war to write off $4 quadrillion of debts and responsibilities. And God forbid that ever happens. Although with these lunatics, you never know. Or you have the second, a civil war in the United States. And I talked about this way back when in 2014. I explained it. I even explained that when I was at the European Parliament. You remember my first famous speech at the European Parliament in 2010 when I talked about the Bilderberg Group, which is like never, unheard. Somebody actually speaking at the European Union Parliament on the Bilderbergers. And then in 2012, I gave my second speech on the financial collapse, upcoming financial collapse, and I actually discussed this. Okay, and we're seeing it right now. So the point is, you have to write out this enormous $4 quadrillion bubble. How do you do that? Well, the best way is force majeure. What's that? That's a global thermonuclear war. And again, I hope it doesn't, get to that. But these people are insane. Or how do you explain the fact that the Bill Gates is and the what's his name, Bezos is and Peter Thiel, the owner of PayPal, they're building, this $100 million bunkers. Peter Thiel is building it like in New Zealand. I can't remember how many thousands of acres of land he bought to build his, underground bunker. But the point is that the United States as a country, okay, has a life cycle. It doesn't mean that it dies. It just means that, it reemerges every 80 years and has like a fork in the road. So the situation right now is that, and what I was explaining back in 2012 or 2014, what we're seeing right now, we talked about the revolution. Even when the Trump book came out, I said America is, facing or civil war and a breakup of the nation. The same thing again, the same metaphorical train that came into the station in 1991 that said the Soviet Union is coming into another station. And we're seeing it as a distinct possibility. I can't remember what that congresswoman's name is, the blonde lady. I don't even know what her name is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. She talked about, separating blue and red states. What do you call that? Because the differences between the two extremes are so large that you can't just sit down at a, negotiating table and work it out. It's simply not possible.
No, I think there's quite some ingenuity happening here, and I'm very hopeful for the future.
Explain,
and then,
I want to get your point of view. What do you mean ingenuity?
The ingenuity of the American people to reinvent themselves and to find new ways to do things.
Yeah, but we're talking about, again, this is that goes to the core of what the nation state is. Like in this sense, how do you do this?
You do this generationally. you do this
They have
generation.
no time to do that generation.
Oh, yeah, we do. Yeah, I think so. But, and now one thing that I'm seeing, you know, I've been studying the secret societies for a long time, right? And one thing that I see is that people like you, people like me, and all of the people that have been looking at the corruption, you know, with the internet, we've been talking about it worldwide, okay? I mean, before the internet, you could say skull and bones and people wouldn't know shit, okay? Since that, all of that information has started to come out, information, you know, causes things to happen. I've seen where the influence and the ability of the secret societies, first off, to keep secret, okay, has been waning, okay, especially starting very strongly in George W. Bush's administration, okay, because, you know, the internet came around in the late 1980s, you know, 1990s, okay, and what happens once the secret societal network starts to lose its ability to reach down through all these levels and to do things, okay? Once that breaks up, what's your next level under the secret societies? It's the sovereign countries, okay? And that's why we're seeing, you know, much more independence from these sovereign countries.
But Kris, have a look at the things again. If you mentioned Skull and Bones, and of course you're the publisher of Anthony Sutton's books on Skull and Bones. But if we kind of look at secret societies and we look specifically at Skull and Bones, which is a division of the famous Illuminati, you have another great book, the what's it called, by the guy from New Brunswick?
Perfectibilist.
The Perfectibilist, exactly. I mean, that's a great book on the Illuminati. So we know that, for example, the elements in the society that will have to be changed in order to bring this global one world government are education, money, law, politics, history, what is it, psychology, philanthropy, medicine, religion, media, and continuity. In other words, the power to appoint, you know, who follows you in the footsteps. And in that sense, I may agree with you because, again, it's not the same having David Rockefeller or his father, John D. Rockefeller, than David Rockefeller. But if you look at today's Rockefellers, it's not the same cup of tea. Because one of the incongruities, and I see it every single day, about our understanding or people's understanding of the essence of any secret societies. How can there exist a common objective when members are apparently acting in opposition to one another? And people say right away, well, you know, we can't even, you know, agree on, you know, with the people in my building on who's going to take the garbage out on Tuesday morning, ha, ha, ha. Okay, that the objective of these people is neither left nor right, because everybody is, you know, it's very divisive. We're seeing it right now in America. Left, right, Trump, anti-Trump, MAGA, anti-MAGA, you know, gay rights, anti-gay, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is that the division itself, and people don't understand that the left and right are artificial devices to bring about change, and that the extremes of this political left and political right are vital elements in this process of controlled change. Yeah. And that's the essence of the Hegelian logic. Because again, what most people don't know is that the fact is that Karl Marx and Adolf Hitler, the extremes of both left and right, presented in textbooks as enemies, they came out of the same philosophical system, which is Hegelianism. So how do you get this through to people that there's no such thing, that everything that we're seeing right now, them dividing us, while they're stealing our constitution, our rights, etc., all these things they're stealing from us.
Right,
and so
right,
this conflict of opposites is essential to bring about change. How do you explain it to people who are used to watching TV and getting information as if we're watching two football games playing each other? And they're made to decide. They're made to choose. That's the whole thing. They are made, people are made to choose this or that. They don't understand that this plus that is the synthesis.
Right. No, they, you know, their main object of the secret societies is control. Okay. And the thing that I'm saying is that their control is weakening, and so some of that control is yes, I do. It's gone to the sovereign countries. Okay, it's more.
Name me one sovereign country, because again, as you well know, in the Hegelian system, conflict is essential, and the Hegelian system, based on Hegel, the state is absolute. And the state is absolute right now with America and Canada. We saw that with COVID in Europe, in Australia, in Russia, in China. There's no state. And if you're talking about a region, we can talk about regionalization of economies. We can talk about European Union. Absolute control by the state.
Right.
Total absolute control. And this is what we're seeing right now, except that before we had countries, now they're breaking it up into regions, but they're still more powerful than ever. The European state, not the nation states themselves, they have lost power at the expense of the greater European state.
Well,
and that could be the same, for everywhere else.
The dialectic is the first fail-safe device that we have as a people. I call it the dark hallway. You walk down the hallway, you bump into one side, and then you bump into the other side. Okay, I say some things that I know are true about secret societies, drug running, and intelligence agencies. Okay, then I find somebody that I know is a spook, okay, saying stuff a little bit more outrageous. Okay, he's putting some lies in there. Okay, because by controlling the extremes, you control the middle. Okay?
Exactly.
Well, the next fail-safe device is the cycle of generations. Okay, and there's a very good book called Generation: A History of America's Future. Because if just the propaganda and the psychological warfare, if that was all in play, okay, Trump would be president here today. He would have won the last election.
I don't think so, because again, it's not a foregone conclusion, because again, that the common feature between the seemingly dissimilar positions, whether we're talking about Trump, or we're talking about Biden, we're talking about Clinton, it doesn't matter. They have a higher common objective in which clash of ideas is absolutely essential.
Yeah, but you're forgetting about the people. The people.
Chris, how difficult it is to manipulate people?
Not that difficult.
I think it's the easiest thing in the world. I'll just put it out there on television to tell them this is the truth, and most of them will believe you. And if not, then others who will watch other media, they will believe you. And because you control, as you know, everything, how do you get people to understand?
But they don't control everything. They don't control everything. Their control is not absolute.
But that's a very interesting point. When you have this synthetic, clash of ideas, so long as rights of individuals, because again, it's about individual, we're not divisible, we're individuals, are not introduced into the discussion, the clash of ideas generated the conflict necessary for change. And so as the objective is global control, an emphasis is placed on internationalism, which is what we're seeing right now. And this is done through world organizations, world law. And in this sense, who was one of the greatest contributors to that? The Tafts, one of the most influential families in American history. Most people, even in the United States.
Alfonso Taft founded Skull and Bones.
Exactly. So we're talking about the order. Okay, we're also talking about, the contribution that they made to the world court system and the world law, to the internationalist aspect of the new world order.
Well, and again, we live on one planet. We live on one planet.
Chris, let's talk about education. Hey, look at education in America. I mean, I look at education in any country in the world. Okay, because an uneducated masses are far more easy to control. I mean, would you say that America's education system is topped?
I would say it had been taken over by the order. That was one of the first things that they did. And they brought over the Prussian education system to teach the children. But you see, the internet and books are beyond that. Okay, they're beyond that control. I mean, they work very hard to try and control the internet and, take information they don't like and get it off of there. Okay. But, people are awful stubborn. People are awful stubborn. And I'm very hopeful that, the people are going to continue to work towards their own embodiment, their own thing. Now, I want to switch things here just a little bit. Okay, I want to talk to you about Henry
George. One last thing about, I want to mention a couple of things. You were talking about, the education system. You have Timothy Dwight,
right?
But Daniel Coit Gilman.
Yeah, I know all about them. And he started they helped start Stanford, and they've been very much in control. but I'm saying that control is lessening because, more people know about it. Okay. And when you know about what's going on, you have a better chance of changing it. Okay. Now, well, I'll go back just a little bit. Black International, you talked about that at the Vatican. Okay. Now,
Well, Black International is the Vatican. It's the Fourth Reich. It's the Roman Empire of Germanic nations, and it's blood and soil. Okay, and blood and soil is, again, anyone who is an aristocrat or comes from Europe understands what that means. These are the old landed aristocracy. These are the people who have been around for 1,000 years. Okay, they're not merged by blood.
Well, I'm very hopeful, but again, I want to change it again back to Tolstoy. His last book that he wrote,
Resurrection. Yeah.
Right.
Actually, it's not his last book. When we talked before the show, you said Tolstoy's last book. I was trying to remember the name. Tolstoy's last published book, especially in the West, it's The Resurrection. But he has written a couple of other books, after Resurrection, and they deal with the land reform in Russia. I can't remember the title. He didn't ever finish the book, but he was actually in the books where he was analyzing the idea of how to reform, because Russia until the late 1930s was an agrarian nation with 90% illiteracy rate. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so Tolstoy was actually dealing with the problem of trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that you had so many uneducated people, and how you could actually turn this enormous mass of uneducated people into a force. And that was his last book, which he never finished. Okay. But Resurrection is his last, famous book. Yes.
Right. And in that, he talked about Henry George. Okay. And Henry George is a guy out of America who was the second to Mark Twain as far as, public lectures and stuff like that in the late 1800s and 1900s. And then basically he got buried, by the education system here. But, the American people are starting to wake up to this, and it's a different way of dealing with it. And again, and I think another thing that's going to be big is what money is.
Chris, let me tell you something else. Again, you mentioned earlier before the show, we talked a little bit about transhumanism, and again, there's a revolutionary book, Transevolution: The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction, which you published. And I'm very grateful to you for that. A lot of things are happening right now. We predicted 10 years ago. So let me bring another aspect into this. You're talking about education and people waking up. Okay, their studies have been done. Have you ever heard of the term inforg?
No.
Okay, well, their studies have been done on children. Okay, we're talking about 3 generations. My generation, I was born in 1966. The generation of people who were born in the early 1990s, and the kids who were born today. So what did these investigators find? They found that the devices and the gadgets and this continuous presence online, okay, they thought, initially that they would turn our kids, my kids who are 15 years old, into blabbering fools. But that has not been the case. In fact, today's children are smarter than the international metrics for children. Now, the researchers didn't think that the passage of children from the physical material world to the digital online world would instantly produce a change in their cognitive abilities that affect the way they perceive the world around them, but it did.
Yes.
And already in the first, and this information has been out for about a year now, in the first digital age generation, which is what my kids are, the researchers are witnessing what? The degradation in the way children perceive the physical material world around them. And for now, we don't have any solid proof why this is happening. They don't know. Okay, I think that the results of this new research can be interpreted in favor of this heuristic hypothesis of the algorithm cognitive culture. In other words, the transformation of Homo sapiens into something else, inforgs, in other words, hybrids of people and algorithms. And both conclusions of the study within the framework of this hypothesis seems, quite logical. and a direct consequence. So basically, if you kind of look at these specific changes in children's cognitive abilities during the transition from the pre-digital to the digital era, as per the new research, okay, it shows us that these are completely different species. And I could see that, for example, my kids, the way they type with their thumbs, Jesus Christ, I have never seen people use these things with with such dexterity. In my day and age, if I wanted to learn something, I needed to have an encyclopedia, so we all had at home encyclopedias. Today, they have access to the internet with all the amount of material they can intake in a matter of seconds. So they process that differently. And we don't really know, we have no proof. Okay?
Right. Well, again, this reinforces my belief in the cycle of generations. Okay, you have a idealistic, then you have a reactive, then you have a civic, and then you have
an adaptive generation,
and then you start it all over again. Okay, and this helps move history forward. Okay, beyond this corruption, because I mean the corruption is quite evident. Unless you're stuck in some, dogmatic, either political or religious, some sort of framework. Okay. But if you're just being real and looking at the world, their understanding of how the world works and their understanding that, okay, I'm not supposed to hate these gay people over here. There's been gay people forever. Okay, they're really starting to understand beyond what we had possible to us. So
Kris,
I'm very hopeful.
Do you like science fiction books?
Oh yeah. I used to read. I read every Heinlein I could get my hands on, and lots of.
There's famous Strugatsky brothers in the Soviet Union, and they predicted, talking about 60 years ago, this entire process, literally more than half a century ago, in several of their famous science fiction books. Again, we're talking about children and we're talking about the future. And again, if you want to change the future, there is one sure way to do this. You change the children. Change the way they perceive the world around them. Change the way they think. Change their cognitive abilities.
And they're doing that all by themselves.
Well, okay. The children of the elite.
No, all children of everybody, not just the elite.
There's a book called Slimies, okay? The Strugatsky's brother, the character, okay, in the book called The Ugly Swans. It was published, I think the year I was born in 1966. And so in this book, the Slimies, they return from this terrible dystopia of the future to fix the present. And they succeeded, having prepared a new generation of children capable of converting the development of civilization in the future towards a more optimal path. So let me ask you this. Do you really think that today's children are, on the right path to change the future of humanity?
Yes. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because, I mean, how many movies, they look in the future and it's always dystopian. It's always, either environmental disaster, economic disaster, whatever. And, they see all what these people are projecting out there, and they want to do something different. I really do. They want to do something different than their parents. Remember when you were young? Didn't you want to, quote unquote, save the world? Look at what these people before us did,
I wanted to be an astronaut, but today's kids, for the most part, want to be YouTubers and influencers.
Right.
Which is not really the same thing. I think that civilizational processes have entered the zone of evolutionary singularity, which makes these processes completely unpredictable. And the thing is that science cannot answer exactly why and how all this can happen or happens, because there is no precedent for this. And the best way we can do at this point is to try to construct.
That's good. That's good, because if there's no awareness of what's gonna be there, then what can be there is something new that we can make. Okay.
Because again, I think the future generation of children, again, I can see it with my kids, okay? There'll be a mix of the divine and transhumanism in more than one. Again, I think it's difficult to obtain scientifically at this point sustained, confirmation of the algorithmic cognitive cultural hypotheses. The whole thing of informs. And I think the first such confirmation could be in the instrumental recording of changes in the level of mental development of modern older preschool children. Because why older preschool children? Because it's at this age that children already possess these complex cognitive abilities, but we have not yet been subjected to the powerful influence of the school system itself, which is being degraded as we speak. So again, you're seeing a clash, okay, of this parallel worlds. On the one hand, you have inforks who are learning who are completely new civilization, new breed of kids. But on the other hand, you have, the degradation of the school system, all the wrong values being imposed on the children. And so we need somehow to be able to verify, and not only verify, but quantitatively measure children's cognitive tools, their cognitive abilities, on the basis of which, the set of tools of complex cognitive activities formed. But
Right.
where can you find first, the data on these generations of pre-digital age? It doesn't exist. So like we're entering, this period of this digital socialization and this cultural historical paradigm, a changing child in a changing world. They
Right.
have nothing to go on thus far. And so we don't know how it's going to affect.
I mean, you have goat herders in Kenya that have a smartphone, So, things are really going to change. Well, we could talk for hours, Daniel, but we have to think about our listeners and whatnot. Bruce, do you have any questions or comments?
Nothing succinct enough, and this is a robust episode. I look forward to part 2 in the not distant future.
Anytime you want, gentlemen.
Daniel, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Kris. I love you. You and I have known each other for 20 years almost. And it's been
Wally Doodle.
it's been a wonderful journey.
Onwards.